Would you mind reading The Weakness of Men?
Oh, I'd love to. Thank you. Yeah. This is.
Another favorite of mine.
Oh, well, I'm glad I included it because my wife's always been so on this one. Uh, this is. I think you were present years ago when I got to read from my sonnet sequence in The Hanging God, Wiped Out, which was partly inspired by the now infamous fraud that was played upon Manti Te'o, the Notre Dame football player who had a non-existent girlfriend. Uh, Someone was conning him. I forget what is it called? Catfishing is the term.
Mhm.
I I I've noticed that an unusual for most, at least by poetic standards, an unusual number of my poems have, in some sense, been inspired by Notre Dame football. And this one, "The Weakness of Men," emerged out of two things: out of an anecdote about making phone calls that Jody Bottom, the former editor of First Things, made in one of his essays, but also Lou Holtz, the great national championship winning and much beloved Notre Dame football coach. He was asked by a journalist years ago. He said, "What's the difference between football players from the early days you're coaching and from the latter days you're coaching?" And Holtz said that during football training, that during fall training camp in football, he used to really try to break down the players so that they would be docile and obedient to him, and it would take him sometimes the whole camp, sometimes weeks and weeks to accomplish that aim. And the journalist says, "Well, how about now?" And Lou Holtz said, "About 15 minutes." The weakness of men. The story is that men are getting softer. They break down sobbing, hide a face beneath a towel after they've been benched, as if a private room of terry cloth could shut out our contempt. They say that some men are afraid to lift a phone, to call the drugstore and ask the hours of the pharmacy. They'll sit there, sunk upon the couch, and wait for someone else to do it out of pity. As Shakespeare must have known, or his Iago would never have pursued his jealousies with such an anxious indirection, nor his Edmund boast such God-defying strength, only to try some good at his last whimper. The feeble and ambitious are the same. The one man seem most furious for glory and stand above the bloody corpse he's vanquished is no sign he won't cower in address. I think back half a lifetime, when I sat at work each day in a small cubicle, waiting for some superior to ask if I would type a contract, make some copies, or maybe nudge the office fern near sunlight. Between us, we knew what I had been asked was servile, unimportant, even shameful, such that my betters would avert their eyes and hasten back behind an oaken door. It didn't help that some thought I was smart and asked for summaries of the books I read at lunch while eating in the conference room. One man who was a serious Jew would quiz me of my knowledge of his people's faith. So glad for the excuse to talk of it, and yet suspicious too I'd cribbed my answers or feigned my interest just to get ahead. But silently, we both knew that was futile. One day he mentioned he had written poems, their subject being the mysteries of God disclosed to those who braved their circumcisions. He longed that they at last be read by someone. He even brought them, locked in his worn briefcase, and stood before me, wetting waxen lips, clutching the precious weight against his thigh. But that was it. Once we faced one another, fear I'd dislike or steal them pulled him back. His face came back to me a few years later, when intern for a little magazine. It was my job to open the submissions and stack the cover letters with their poems or stories for the editors to read. And letter after letter said the same. "These are great poems. I know that you will love them. It's so important they be published soon, so please write back and tell me they've arrived." Insistence, bolstered by uncertainty, the authors seemed as equally convinced of their great genius as their impotence to make us see it. A great world's new birth lay waiting in their verse, they seemed to say, though just beneath the paper's zealous flutter they'd sigh, "One more rejection and I quit." There is a reason that the natural law says none may serve as judge in his own cause. All men are made of glass. They pass through life, knowing an hour comes when they'll be shattered. But yes, There was a time when guile or cunning could better hide from others what we now conceal by both self-flattery and silence from just ourselves. Old tales of tragic courage founded in weakness gradually give way to news reports of young men paled to ghosts who live in haunted terror of lost pride.